Erin Molan is a television and radio host, a journalist and newspaper columnist, an ambassador for charities and foundations, a keynote speaker and event MC, a baby clothing designer as well, and a mum, keeping you busy. It was her own experience with online abuse that led to her advocacy for new laws to protect Australians online. The Online Safety Act, or Erin's Law, as the former Prime Minister Scott Morrison referred to it, passed Parliament in 2021. Erin, welcome to the podcast.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. I really appreciate it.
Annual holiday tradition, every year without fail, or change it up?
Oh, God. That's one hell of a blunt start. Like usually you ask how I am or something, right?
We like to stump everyone from the start. So that's a nice little 50-50 day. So you're okay.
One or the other.
So you don't want me to expand?
Oh, we might.
Yes, please do.
Let's change it up.
Yes.
Why is that?
Well, as someone who has worked in television for a very long time and didn't take holidays, probably up until only maybe 2 years ago, I'm insanely jealous of anyone who has an annual regular holiday. So I can't really comment on it because the first holidays I really took were year before last when I was on gardening leave. So I'd left Channel 9, poached by News Limited and Sky Australia. So 9 didn't let me back in the building, which is flattering because if they let you back in and let you do a slow, soft exit, it means that you're not that valuable to them. So in some ways it was brutal, but in other ways I thought they obviously think that I'm important enough not to let me back in the building. So I had like 6 weeks off for the first time in my adult life because the other issue with television is that you can never take holidays because if they put someone younger, hotter, better on to replace you, you'll never get your job back. So my whole kind of key to success has been just never giving them the opportunity to find anyone else. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm clinging to it desperately.
That must actually kick in a fair bit because you do see, let's go back to the 80s. It felt like newsreaders and all these people were like in their 50s and then their 40s and now 30s. And then what are we going to have, like 18-year-olds eventually reading the news? Or what is that?
I hope not.
So do I.
Because they've got influencing now. They can be social media influencers, so they can leave the real news and stuff to us. So, look, when you're 18, you don't. Yeah, you can get by on other things. Leave it to us. Let's hope not.
Very true. So here's what's interesting. We were talking about politics a little bit before. Now you're born in Canberra, but raised in Indonesia. And you constantly moved around. It says here 16 times, and, obviously following your dad involved with the army. What was that like?
It was an incredible upbringing, to be honest. And it's the kind of lifestyle, it doesn't suit everyone. And there were kids of diplomats who struggled immensely with that kind of lifestyle, understandably. But for some reason, my siblings and I really thrived with that. And look, to be honest, it's probably things down the track or things I'm discovering now that are the negative impact of having moved around so much and not having those solid foundations and having to make friends. Every year I went to 16 different schools. But the plus side, in my opinion, well and truly overrides any negative impact. I speak a second language. I learnt Bahasa Indonesia over there for 7 years. I was over there the first time 92, 93, 94, and then 97, 98. And 98 was a really crucial period for Indonesia and for their people, and to be there as a kind of a girl in my early teens and to witness an entire country essentially stand up and say, enough, we're not going to accept the government that we have. We're not going to accept a dictatorship. President Suharto had been in power for 30-odd years and ruled with an iron fist. He was incredibly corrupt. His children owned every major piece of infrastructure, highways, all of that kind of stuff. And most of the people were living in incredible poverty. And to watch a nation rise up of millions of people and go to the streets and fight for democracy was incredible. And that lit something inside of me that then led me to the career that I've had essentially. And it took me a long time to get back home to politics after that initial love of watching a nation fight for democracy. I mean, rugby league is not quite on that same level, but I'm back there now, and that's generally what sparked my kind of interest in the media. Going home after the Trisakti University shootings, which was a famous event that happened during one of the riots, where students were shot and killed by the Indonesian police and military. and not seeing it on the news and saying to mum and dad, why isn't this on the news? And they spoke about the fact that there wasn't a free press. And that really resonated and stuck with me. And believe you me, I've experienced and still do to this day the negative side of the media. I'm in a fairly unique position in that I work in the media, but I'm also someone, for some reason, that gets written about a lot. And I'm completely boring and I have no idea why. I still do not understand it to this day, but I understand that the media can be very damaging, but well beyond that, freedom of press is one of the most important things in a democratic society, and it's something that I feel very privileged to be a part of.
Has your skin gotten thicker over the course of your career? How have you dealt with it?
Absolutely. It's it's amazing to reflect, and I haven't done that in a little while. I was thinking I lost Dad at the start of this year, and Dad, probably no one closer to me than my dad, and I'm 39 now for my whole life, and he's been a massive part of my life. And I was thinking about, say, my first show on the Footy Show and working my ass off to get there and doing so much prep and knowing my shit back to front. Getting up there, I had a little 10-minute segment for my first ever opportunity. Absolutely nailed it. And I'm very self-deprecating, so I'll tell you firsthand when I don't, and there's been plenty of times, but nailed it. And I remember feeling $1 million, getting off there and then looking at my phone and seeing Twitter start to light up and never having experienced not only that kind of avalanche of abuse and hate, but focused almost entirely on what I looked like, what I was wearing, and the fact that I was a woman. So no one had any issue with anything I'd said or any facts that I'd given. Nothing I'd said was wrong, but it was purely based on my looks. And not just the fact that there was an issue with them, but the fact that I should be raped because of it, that I should be killed. And it was just the most incredible thing to experience as, mid-20s and having never been in that world. I didn't have a profile at that stage. It was my first time in prime time. And I remember ringing Dad straight after the show just in tears and saying, Dad, they hate me on Twitter, the blah, blah, blah. And I just remember always Dad saying, Erin, have you been shot at by the infidel in Iraq? And I'm like, no. He said, well, toughen the fuck up. Yeah. Really good point. And that was my first kind of experience of being told to just toughen up, which I did for 10 years and I still do to this day. But it did get to the stage, and I'm sure we'll get to that later on, where I determined that I was very willing to be tough when it came to criticism, because you cannot be everyone's cup of tea, and how boring if you were. And I don't need to be liked by everyone. And, I know who I am, and that's enough for me. But when it came to things like rape threats and people threatening to rape my unborn child is when I determined that enough is enough. I'm in the public eye, absolutely. People can write on Twitter that I'm a dickhead, absolutely go for gold, but they cannot threaten to rape my unborn child. And that's what led to the legislation and Erin's law that you mentioned earlier on. But yeah, skin is definitely thicker. It would take, and I don't mean to lay out a challenge, but it would take something extraordinary to penetrate me at this stage of my career. And I also have a kind of mentality, and probably the last 5 years I've adopted this, I don't read a thing. Whether it's positive, there's a lot of lovely positive articles, cover stories written about me that people will send to me or say, this is great. And I say, thank you, that's beautiful, but I don't read anything. Because I remember Brad Fittler telling me, you can't read the bad and think that you're horrific and then read the good and think that you're amazing. You either buy into everything or you buy into nothing. And I decided to buy into nothing. So I still to this day, if I'm in a headline or I know an article's about me, I don't read it.
That I didn't know the extent of that. For you to share that breaks my heart, because I have a son and a daughter, but my son, he's a little bit more sensitive towards words, and for your father to be able to nearly not want to kill these people, and then all the rest, like as in not literally, but like as in just really push people out of the way and defend his daughter is difficult, but he also knew that, hang on a sec, she's greater than this, and let's, speak words into her, an affirmation. But hang on a sec, you're going into a tough environment, and you do have to toughen up, to use his words, not exactly his words, but to use his words. But, that's something that, I think you would have looked at your dad and gone, hang on a sec, this is a moment in time where he's speaking into me and I'm listening, and it has made a difference. Is that what you'd say?
Absolutely. And it's something that, Dad, the qualities that Dad possessed are some of the most incredible you could ever imagine. And I've been so blessed. And, that every day now the pain of losing him is acute, and it's at times it's still unbearable, and it will be, I'm sure, for a long time to come. But I feel so blessed to feel it because it meant that he was so amazing. And there have been so many times over my life where something he said or something he's done or the way he lived his life, you know, he was a major general in the army, the integrity that he had, every decision he made was to benefit someone, this country. He risked his life for this country when he went to East Timor, when he led the war in Iraq. You know, if you would sit at a dinner table and listen to him speak and talk about the fact that, you know, they would come to him with, we've got this terrorist cell here. There's a preschool and a primary school there. You know, the kids are going to be home at 3. We can't bomb till this time. We can't ethically. Let's look at what we can legally do. We can't kill any innocent people. We can't, you know, some of the things that have been said about the military over recent years, there's been some behaviours that have been appalling, but the vast majority of our servicemen and women are the most incredible human beings who care more about human beings than anyone else. And the only reason they go to war is to protect us. And Dad had the utmost integrity, his strength of character. And that's my thing always, you know, I always think, and now more than ever, would this make Dad proud? And from very early on, you know, I was naughty as a teenager from about maybe 16 to 21. And that was kind of my naughty phase. And from that moment on, and when I say naughty, like I was never arrested or, you know, I've never tried a pill. I mean, naughty by my standards, you know, went out and dropped down.
Typical teenage girl, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So pretty lowbrow naughty stuff. But from that kind of 21, when I got my first job in TV, I've just always aimed to show the kind of morals and values that Mum and Dad instilled in me. And yeah, Dad over the years, even when I first started in TV, and I remember once, you know, this man just being awful to me in front of everyone else and being quite degrading and dismissive and commenting on something that I was wearing in a humiliating way, and me coming home and talking to Dad about it and being quite upset. And he said, you know, you walk back in there tomorrow and you say to him in front of everyone else, not privately, in front of everyone else, never speak to me again like that, ever. And he said, that's all you need to say. He will never do it again, blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, but should I do it privately, pull him to the side? And he said, no. He did it to you in front of that group. You do it to him in front of that group so he knows you don't accept it. And I remember going in and I was shitting myself. And I'm naturally not an aggressive or a confident, strong person in those situations. You know, put me on air in front of a camera, fine. But standing up for myself never came naturally to me. It does now, very much so, but it didn't back then. And my voice was shaking and I remember doing it. And he came over to me an hour later and said, you know, I'm really sorry, I shouldn't have done that. And thank you. And a few other people said that was really brave. And, you know, just it's such a little thing, but just stayed with me for a long time. And, you know, I haven't had to deploy that much over my career, but just that sense of backing yourself and standing up for what's right has always been instilled in me from a very young age.
So you talk about a young age, you know, 16 to 21, interesting times. But were you, you know, the young girl that the age of 6, you know, behind a microphone or presenting to, you know, the family in the lounge room? Where did it start?
Great question. I always loved telling stories, and that's always been my first love, and writing. So writing and telling stories. And actually before I had my first TV job, I was in the speech writing department at Government House in Canberra, writing speeches for the Governor-General's wife. And so writing's always been the biggest thing for me. But when we lived over in Indonesia, the first time my siblings and I would lead this, always would make these kind of news videos to send back to Granny and Grandpa and all our family back in Australia of kind of updates of our lives and that kind of thing. And I would always be the main anchor or sport. And then, you know, my sister would be entertainment. And my little brother loathed it, but he always had to be weather. So we had to stand there with a paddle pop stick and a big sun on it. And still to this day, I don't think forgives us for the role that he had to play because he just hated standing there with the sun on a stick. But that's kind of where the love of broadcast came from. And it was all about just a creative way of telling stories. And as I got older, then I obviously told you about 1998 in Jakarta, which was the real kind of news angle of the media career. But yeah, I've loved telling stories, loved writing, loved communicating, loved connecting with people. And it sounds so cliched, but the beauty of what we do is that, you know, you can find creative, incredible, powerful ways to tell people's stories. And the most powerful stories I've told aren't, the likes of Roger Federer or prime ministers. I've been blessed to interview a whole heap of movie stars, singers, the whole shebang, but it's everyday Australians who overcome incredible hardship and agony, and who use that as a catalyst for good to help others are the ones that will stay with me forever. And yeah, it's so it started at a young age, but still going strong to some extent, which is nice.
That's really good. So you mentioned stories, love telling stories. Now you eventually venture into rugby league, and that's full of stories, no doubt. But I remember one of your first, sideline reports. I think it was on the Sunday Footy Show. But obviously you've got a passion for rugby league there. Canberra, naturally rugby league down there. But where did that come from, and why did you suddenly go, hey, I really want to participate in rugby league and reporting on it?
Yeah, it's really interesting because Mum and Dad were more AFL growing up, and because we'd moved around a lot, I was never in this saturated rugby league environment at all. It was really only when I was older. Even in year 11 and 12, I was a massive Brisbane Lions fan. I was at the Gabba when they got their three-peat, and, used to love, Nigel Lappin and Michael Voss and the Awesome Foursome and Simon Black. And who didn't? I think Nigel Lappin's the only one who didn't get a Brownlow medal. They had 3 Brownlow medalists running around at one time, and Justin Lepage and Mal Michael had legs like tree trunks. And that was my real obsession, was the Brisbane Lions for up until about 18. And then when I moved to Canberra, I started to watch the rugby league. So it was really late in life for me. And I think when I moved to Channel 9, which was, I was about 25, it was 2010, my first job in TV was a local television station called Channel Vision in Canberra, and what we did basically was package up and broadcast local rugby league and local rugby union, so the John I. Dent Cup and the Raiders Cup, I think it was called, the local league competition. And that was my first foray into that sport. And then I got the job at Win TV, which was as a sports reporter, which is basically Raiders and Brumbies, Canberra Capitals every now and then as well. But that's where it really began so much later in life. So I wasn't one of these kids that grew up in a household where it was religion at all. And then when I got to Channel 9 and started working in news in the sports department, it was, to be honest, a real opportunistic decision for me to just become as much of an expert as I could, because Channel 9 had the rights to rugby league. I looked at where I wanted to go in my career, and I thought if I was at 7 and they had the tennis, then I would have committed myself to that. So it was more from a professional perspective than anything else originally. And then it just developed into this passion, this love, and it gave me so much. What disappoints me sometimes is there's so much negativity surrounding my experience in rugby league, just through the trolling and being the first woman to do continuous call team and the footy show and all these different types of things, and host a Sunday Footy Show and that kind of thing. But the experience was incredible, and the positivity was overwhelming compared with the negativity. The negativity was so tiny, but just so projected because it's clickbait and it's social media. And, you might get 3 dickheads online saying that you suck, and the headline is "Fans Revolt, Want Molan Gone." And you look through the article, this is back when I used to read them, looking for all the thousands of millions of fans, because hundreds of thousands watch the Want You Gone, and it's Jay-Z 106 and his other 2 burner accounts, and you go, yeah, right, Fans Revolt. And that was so much of it, and it did become, it was really hard to deal with for a long time there, because, you look at the side of the physical threat side and the fear side, that's one thing, but just your own confidence. And I used to, it's only probably 5 or 6 years ago that I really became better equipped at dealing with it, because I started to understand why it happened. I started to understand that you could be Mother Teresa opening an orphanage in Botswana and they would absolutely annihilate you online, that this group of people, this section of people, hate everyone. And in the early days, it felt like it was just me, because it's all I would see. And you start to think, God, I'm a really good person. I do a good job. Channel 9 are not a charity. There's 1,000 other people who'd kill for this job, 1 million. And believe you me, as I said, they're not a charity. If I didn't rate well, and if I didn't, resonate with viewers, and they test every bloody week, I would not be there. They are not kind. They are a commercial TV network. So I'm thinking, I know I do a good job. I know what I'm bad at. I'm very self-aware. I'm shithouse at a lot of things. I could never commentate. I would be horrendous, but I can bloody host, and I host really bloody well, and I do the work, and I've got, a shitload of skills in that space, I know. So why is this, happening? And then you look at the female aspect, and some people just weren't ready for a woman in rugby league to sit in that chair. There was the whole argument, oh, you've never played the game, you don't deserve to be there. And then I'd look left at Simon Boda, who's the police reporter, and I think, well, you've never served as a policeman. And then I look at the court reporter, Dimity Clancy, and I'm like, well, you've never been in jail. Like, how are you more qualified? I'm looking around, Gabby, our medical reporter, she covers cancer stories. She's never had cancer. There was such a double standard when it came to rugby league. And if I was, sitting up there and got everything wrong, it would be valid criticism, absolutely. But I didn't. It was the fact that I was a woman, that they didn't like my dress, or that I'd never played. So it was, it was a real baptism of fire, rugby league, but such an incredible experience, such a wonderful privilege, and it launched my career. I look at what I'm doing now, and the fun that I had on that footy show. I was on there for 7 years, and the fun, the things we got to do, the highway of happiness, where Bo and I versed Fatty and the big man in a caravan, and Big Man couldn't reach the toilet, and, there's piss everywhere, and Bo just is a complete next level nutcase who I love and adore more than life. But some of the trips we went on, some of the, segments we did, like I nearly died, I think 8 times over 7 years because of the stupid shit they'd make me do. But it was incredible, and it launched, me into this sphere that I could never have imagined, and that I've been able to turn into a career and make an incredible livelihood out of. And, so sometimes I do get disappointed that so much of that experience is associated with the trolling, because I was the first woman, and all the awful things that the 2 or 3 blokes and stalkers that were charged and went to court and that kind of thing. But really, apart from that side and, a couple of other challenges that everyone has in their workplace, it was an incredible privilege.
So, Erin, you didn't go into it to be the first woman on the footy show. You didn't try to be the pioneer, but you were without trying. How conscious were you then? And even just looking back now, that you have paved the way for future female journalists in sport and other things.
Yeah, it's never been put to me that way, actually, as in, did I consciously go to be a pioneer or to be the first? And it was not even on my radar at all in terms of being the first woman. And I was raised, in my eyes, there was absolutely no difference, in terms of being a woman or being a man. It was only when I was put in that role and the avalanche of hate that came based purely on my sex, essentially, on my gender, that I even kind of noticed. And that's hand on heart honesty. There weren't, when I got to that newsroom, there was, I think, only one other woman. When I was covering rugby league in Canberra, there was rarely another woman. Sometimes there was Jen from the ABC, but you were generally the only woman at every press conference that you went to. But the footy show, it was even the Sunday footy show, I think you mentioned, Jay, my first cross there, and that was, one of the proudest moments of my life. And I think, they'd asked 10 people prior to me. I think, Kenny the cleaner wasn't available. That's how desperate they were. And I knew that this was my one opportunity, and I knew that, I had to nail it, because you don't get a second chance. And that's what I've always done. Any opportunity I've been given, I've never had ego in that. If I know they've asked 6 people before me that couldn't do it, I don't say, oh, well, screw you. You didn't ask me first. I'm going to sulk now and not going to do it. I'd say, absolutely love to. Let me now show you why you should have picked me first. But that's all good. Let me show you. And that's always been my attitude. And I've been rejected my whole life. I've got nearly 100 rejection letters from when I was at Win TV trying to go national, to the likes of 9, 7, networks all across the country, regionally, internationally, and they're just the ones that got back to me. Most people don't even respond to you. So very early on, I learned to be rejected and to not let one person's opinion of me or my worth define how I felt about myself, or define what I thought I was capable of if I knew that I could do something. So once I got those opportunities, of course, it was then a massive deal that I was the first woman. And it was only when people started doing stories on me and that was the headline. And I cannot tell you how sick to fucking death I was. I think it was like 5 years in, and every story was about being a woman. Every single story. And there was no malice in it. It was the obvious angle. But God, I got sick to death of it. And towards the end of my career in rugby league, which only finished up, a year and a half ago, it stopped being the angle. And to me, that was such an achievement, in that it had just become the norm. They then found plenty of other angles to write about, but it wasn't about me being a woman. And now, I don't watch really much at all in terms of sport on TV, but I watch enough to know that it is saturated with women. There are women on the sideline, there are women hosting, there are women everywhere, women playing at the top level, and I absolutely love it. And so many, I was at a function last week and two young girls came up and said, we did sports journalism because of you, because we watched you on the footy show and we saw what we hadn't seen before and we knew that we could. And there's been some incredible women in print and radio that came through well before me, Margie McDonald and all these amazing women who were eras before me. But I guess in terms of commercial TV and rugby league and the roles that I did, I was the first, and it's something I'm really proud of, actually, and look back on very fondly for the most part. But yeah, glad that it's changed the landscape, and any role that I've played in that is something I'm really proud of.
It's interesting because you almost take it for granted now, where you're right, there are so many women in TV, and it's almost like you look back and go, wow, how dated were we, or how narrow-minded were we? And anyway, it's just surprising.
That was late day as well. Like, it's not like we're talking about, I wasn't around in the 80s. Like, I moved to Channel 9 in 2010, and I think my first Sunday footy show was 2012. So my first Thursday night footy show was probably like 2013 or 2014. Like, and then I think I joined the Continuous Call team, which has existed for 35 years, the longest running, most popular rugby league radio show. And I was the first woman to ever be a permanent part of that. And that was like 2016. Like, we're not talking about 40 years ago, you know? So I feel like it took a long bloody time. It really
took a long
did.
time,
it
but
wasn't the Stone Age.
We've made a big change, and you're a big part of that, which is really, really cool. It's interesting. We talk about business a lot on this program. We talk about battles. We talk about different things. We've talked about battles, which is pretty impressive. From a business point of view, your brand is your business. It's not like, okay, you own another business. We know that now, but your brand is your business. And how have you had to transition over that time due to external factors? Or have you been somebody, and listening to what you're saying, you have stuck to your core values, but have you had to evolve as well with the media and the different changes and the journey you've had to go along?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. Like, I remember interviewing James O'Connor years ago, former Wallaby. In fact, I don't know, is he still current? I know he made a comeback maybe last year. But I remember him saying something isn't good or is good for brand O'Connor, and just going, did he actually just
Did he just say that?
And did he just say that? But do you know what? It is actually true. Look, maybe less so in his field, because you got to be able to play rugby league, and if you're a gun player, your brand can be pretty poor and you still get a run if you're that good. But in my line of work, absolutely. I rely heavily on people either wanting to watch me, wanting to listen to me, or wanting to read me. And some people can do that, in other ways. They can be shock jocks, or they can be divisive, they can be polarizing. My thing, I've always just wanted to be engaging and wanted to be interesting and wanted to tell stories. And I am absolutely a brand. My brand is my business, and it's spread over, I guess, 4 main areas. And you mentioned the morals and values that I've tried to live by my whole life, and I really have. And, I joke about being naughty from, 16 to 21, but even then, I still at points in time then thought, this is not the right thing to do, so I won't do it. I've always, integrity to me is a big thing. And there's been a couple of, and I won't go into too much detail, but protecting my brand is something that's really, really important to me. And look, there's a million stories written about me all the time. 90% of them are not true. There's stories in the, my partner and I are fighting, or we've broken up, or I'm not wearing my engagement ring, or I've had a nose job. And I'm flattered they think my nose has improved over the years. Never had a nose job. It hasn't changed. But that stuff, who cares, right? That's all fodder. You don't care, whatever. It's clickbait. It's not detrimental to my brand. When they attack you in ways that question your integrity or your morals, and there's been a couple of occasions where I've taken legal action because that's occurred, because it goes against everything that I am. And I feel very strongly about that. And not just from a brand perspective or a, potential to make a living perspective, but because I've worked so hard, I've made choices that I'm proud of, and I want to make my parents proud and my family proud and that kind of thing. And so there's been a couple of times where I've had to stand up, and one was, being accused of having an affair. And that to me at the time was the worst thing that anyone could have ever said about me. I've never, ever had one, never would. It goes against everything I believe in or the way that I was raised, the type of person that I am. And to have that printed as truth, was probably one of the hardest moments of my life. And so then, it's awful to take legal action. It's expensive. It's the anxiety of it. It's a horrific experience in every single way. But you got to do it when you got to do it, because you don't stand up to these people and they keep going. So there's been a couple of times, and the other was, another well publicised, with the Daily Mail. But there are two occasions where, as I said, I'm happy to have things written that are stupid and silly and untrue, and it's all part and parcel, and I'm not punished that every time there's something written comes out and says, that's not true, like, who cares, whatever. But when you come at the core of who I am as a person, I will never lie down when that happens, and I will always fight, and that's the way that I was raised as well. So, yeah, protecting my brand is really important to me because I've worked really hard to establish it, and because it matters to me at the core of who I am, and I hope my brand reflects who I am. So when people attack that, they're attacking me, and that I take personally for obvious reasons.
That's really impressive. You can see the connection with, your dad fighting for lives, and you're doing a similar thing in a totally different way. But at the end of the day, they both have a significant impact on people in their journey. So well done. I talk about the external impact, from, I guess people in the media. We talk about the external impact of, the average community sledging and, doing all the different trolling. However, have you had the external input from, for example, not specifically Channel 9, but people who employ you and say, we need you to change. We need to change your style. We need to change, not necessarily who you are, but the way you go about things, because we're evolving you or changing you and moving you in a different direction. What pressures has that been like?
That's a great question as well. You guys I've done a lot of interviews. I was saying to Bella, my beautiful PA before, that it's always the same thing. I don't know how people don't get bored shitless, but you guys are actually doing a very different podcast, so I'm very impressed.
Good.
What was the question again? No.
Oh, great. Yeah, sure. You need thinking time now. No, it was just more the pressures from your employers and wanting you to change, really.
It's a great question, and it's look, early on in my career, absolutely, not so much in terms of who I am as a person, but more in terms of how I hone my craft and how I present on air, or how I, I remember first footy show, David Gingell, who was the boss of Channel 9 at the time, sent me a text, nailed it, stop moving your fucking hands. Because I literally was like this. I was so nervous that I was going like this.
I can definitely relate to that.
I still think about that. When I sit on the Sky News desk hosting my own show, I still think about that, and I'm conscious of that. Ken Sutcliffe, I once wore a disco frock covering the death of a race car driver, and I just remember getting off the live cross, and in my defense, I put the outfit on prior to him passing, and it just became the top of my story because it had happened overseas, I think in one of the racing circuits overseas, and I was at the V8s on the Gold Coast, so Gold Coast. And so anyway, I'm there ready, and then this guy had passed away, and I had to start my story, and Kenny sending me an email just telling me that what I was wearing was completely inappropriate. And, these are all things that at the time you think, oh, my God, I'm going to lose my job. And I've had moments where, I remember when Greg Inglis joined the Rabbitohs, and I was sent out to try and get an interview, and I was new to Channel 9. I was trying to impress, and I didn't really understand the protocol of media, i.e. the cameras just want to get the shot of him walking onto the field for the first time in a Rabbitohs jersey. It's quite monumentous. And I'm there in like a leopard print muumuu running across trying to interview him and ruining the shot for everyone. And remember my boss at 9 just going off about it and saying, don't play it, stop playing it. And I remember doing a piece to camera early on and being taken off air, and my boss saying, nope, you're not on air. That was horrendous, you're not on air. And, you get all this feedback early on. And my voice was horrific early on, and I was trying to sound too newsreader. It was sing-songy. So you get all that kind of stuff. But very early on, I think there was something to me that was a little bit different and a little bit unique that they identified. And look, I'm unconventional in so many ways. I'm cheeky. My personality is quite unique and a little bit out there. And to be honest, to their credit, Channel 9 only ever really embraced that, and which is amazing. And it made it a lot easier. And Continuous Call Team, that so many of the shows I was part of, Sunday Footy Show was a real, that was one of my favourite things ever to host. And Sterlo, God, I've got to return his call. He's literally called me if I show you my phone now, this is how horrific I am as a person. Just let me show you now. And I am going to call him after this. Yeah, the missed calls. Can you see my phone there? You probably can't see the screen.
I'm
I
sure
am. Yeah,
Sterlo will be
okay.
listening to this podcast, of
I
course, and
adore
we'll
him.
tell him she's
He's a
going to
big
call
fan.
you Sterlo, okay?
I adore him, and my last message is, "I'll call you back," and that was 2 weeks ago or something. But anyway, I adored that show, and the banter and the fun and we take the piss out of each other, same as Continuous Call Team. And I look at what I'm doing now, which is FM Breakfast Radio with Husey and Ed, and that's essentially all we do is banter. We have a laugh, we joke around. They're comedians. I try and be serious sometimes, but usually I'm just taking the piss as well. And then Sky News is probably the first time where I've really had a conversation prior, and this is as a much more confident woman now as opposed to a kind of more naive, less experienced young girl who started at Channel 9. But, when Sky offered me the job and I was trying to weigh up whether or not to stay at 9 because, they made me a great offer as well, and 9 is all I'd known really for 10 years, and it was a really scary, tough decision to make. But I remember saying to the bosses at Sky, I am who I am. I'm not going to be a Peter Credlin. I haven't been a chief of staff to a prime minister. I don't have those kind of insights. I'm not Andrew Bolt. I'm not going to be the kind of commentator that they are. I'm conservative in some ways, national security, the economy, but I'm quite socially progressive in other ways, same-sex marriage, all those kind of things. And I said, I can't come on and not be who I am. So if you want me to be something other than who I am, then it's not going to work. And they were absolutely 100%, we are getting you for exactly who you are and what you do. And that's, that was important to establish because, I could never go somewhere and not be authentic. I think that's the one thing that's really helped my career the entire time. I've always been authentic. I'm very self-deprecating. I take the piss out of myself more than I take the piss out of anyone else. And when I do it with anyone else, it's always gently and with love. I'm very happy to share the tough times. I'm happy to share vulnerability. I'm happy to do all that kind of stuff. And that's enabled people to relate to me a lot, to warm to me and I guess to want to engage with me, which has been really good for my career. So I think if someone wanted me not to be authentically me or to go in a path that I was uncomfortable with, I just wouldn't do it in this day and age. Maybe 10 years ago, yes, but now definitely not.
You can tell that actually shines through because you are somebody that comes across very fun. You are somebody that, can, like on the footy show, mix it with the boys, have a laugh and, almost die 7 times like you say. But,
that's by the way, not official. Don't fact check that 7 times nearly die.
Might be 17 times actually. Yeah.
That's more.
But the thing that motivated me to reach out to you is I think I complimented you on LinkedIn about there was something piece that you did on Sky News and you're calling out some form of rubbish. I can't even remember what it was at the time, but I was just like, hats off to you for calling that out. So you can have the fun, you can call stuff out. And this is the thing, people will stand back and applaud you for that. But then on the other side, they'll also critique you like nothing else for that because people can't handle realness, I guess is what I'm saying, is people want you to do the pretty show, present well, then go live your life. Whereas you live and breathe it to the camera. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I think, there's plenty of people that will do the first thing, that will just play it safe, and fair play to you 100%. It's a lot bloody simpler. But if you want to play with the big boys, as they say, and if you want to, take it to the next level, which I've always been incredibly ambitious, and ambition shouldn't be a dirty word. I never, ever at anyone else's expense, ever, but always been incredibly ambitious. Dad and I always used to talk about what we want to do next, and I'd reach something that I'm okay, what is my goal? Where do I want to go next? What do I want to achieve? What box do I want to tick? Hard work is something that someone might have more talent than me, might have more ability, might be better, but no one will ever work harder than me. And that's always been my mentality with everything that I've done. And I feel, in a lot of ways that it's served me, fairly well thus far. But it's complex. I think the whole thing is very complex in that way.
And that's a fair point because, life is, quite complex.
And if you're talking even, in the morning and radio, I'll do, Husey will be talking about his hemorrhoids. And then that night on Sky News, I'll be interviewing the Prime Minister about, the rising threat of China.
Yes.
And they're two very different worlds. But especially on Sky, my show, Called Erin, is an opinion show. And you got to go out on a limb, and it's, you got to be willing to put yourself out there and to have some strong feelings and to, talk passionately about topics that might not go down well, that might be polarizing, that might start a debate or a discussion, and that's completely fine. But everything I say, I believe, and I'm never cruel. That's always my thing. I look at some broadcasters, and I watch a lot of Fox News as well. I watch a lot of CNN. I like to balance. I listen to ABC Radio a lot as well, because I don't like to just listen to one, conservative network or a, lefty, whatever you want to call it. But I think you've got to have conviction, but you can do it in a way that is not cruel or nasty. And some people I look at, I think that's not my style. I can talk about Joe Biden and his cognitive decline. I can talk about the real terrifying prospect of him leading a free world because he is unwell and he's not functioning at the level that he needs to. And you can do that without taking the piss out of him or without being cruel, and that's always my gauge. And I always think sometimes I'll write something and go, oh, I don't want that to sound like I'm, taking the mick or being cruel, so I'll go back and I'll still be strong and hard, but without any nasty element. So I like to think that even if people might listen and disagree with me, they'll never think that there's malice or that I'm being cruel in what I'm saying.
A breakfast radio show and a Friday night TV show. You're a mum, and then at some point Brand Molan sees a need in the baby clothing market. This podcast looks at business and battles. We've dealt with some of those things already, but also it deals with balance. How on earth do you do it all, Erin?
Very ineffectively. Balance. Look, I'm much better at it these days, much better at it over the past couple of years because I've gotten more confident. And it's been really interesting. In the early days, I said yes to everything. I did everything. I wasn't secure in what I was doing for most of the time. You're always worried that you'll be replaced. And to be honest, sometimes in TV land, they can play on that, and that, keeps you cheaper and it keeps you doing more. And there's that element at play, like there is in a lot of different industries. But as time went on, I think I started to realise my worth and started to realise what I had to offer. And that makes me more confident in setting boundaries and saying no. I earn a very good living. So the kind of things that I used to do all the time, like hosting events and that kind of thing, I now only do if I want to. I don't need them to subsidise my income. So that helps me with balance in that I'm not doing events. I'm a single mum. So I look at time with my daughter is the most important thing to me, the most above anything times a million. And, which is why breakfast radio and Sky appeals to me, because for the first time in my adult life, I have weekends off with her. I also come home at, 10 a.m. and get days with her. So whilst I work a lot, I still feel like I'm a full-time mum. And my biggest fear is looking back and thinking that I missed out on these moments with her. And she's got, an incredible dad who I share her with, and he has her, every second weekend and a night or two during the week. So anything that takes me away from her is a no-go. I say no to. So I think it's about knowing your worth and having the confidence to prioritise what matters to you. And to be honest, since doing that, it's incredible the respect that's shown back to you. I used to be terrified that if I did that, they'd say, well, fine, we'll get someone else. And it really goes the opposite. It's almost the more you value yourself and the more that you demand respect or you enforce boundaries, the more they think you are valuable and deserve those boundaries, even if you don't. So it's so balance is much easier these days, even though I'm busier, doing more, doing more than I ever have before. But I still feel a lot of normality. I don't have a social life. I don't really go out with friends. I might try and do my exercises during the ad breaks of radio in the morning. So I run around with my daughter, but basically, I mother and I work, and that's a choice that I'm making. I'm missing out on other things, absolutely, but I can do that when she starts school. I can go and have a wine with a girlfriend later, but now for me the priority is her and then work.
It's interesting because, me being an old footy head, I always, use footy analogies. And, I think you can put so much effort into your career and you put so much effort into your working day. We work with a lot of builders in our environment and, they work all sorts of crazy hours just to be able to run a business, one of the toughest ones you'll ever run. But I always say to them, you've got golden point at the end of the day. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, well, you've worked you've played the toughest game, and for some reason it's a draw. You're going to go into extra time, which is you going home during that witching hour, and you're going to go again no matter what. And I always say you can do it well, or you can do it poorly. You might as well do it well. You might as well win, because you've got to go home and be that to your kids and be that to your wife or your partner. And if you don't, it's usually going to not end well. So we might as well win. And I think it sounds like you've figured out your no is way more important than your yes. You've found your balance, and your yes is your family or your child. Is that right?
Absolutely. And yeah, I love that. That's a great analogy. And it's so true. And as I said, in the early days, and even, the first year of my daughter's life, really, I was still in that mentality of say yes to everything, terrified of losing my jobs or losing my gig or missing out on opportunities because I'd said no, or them thinking badly of me, or blah, blah, blah. But it's actually far more powerful the other way. And it also comes with a shift as you start to get older. You really do realise what matters. And even, losing Dad over the past couple of years, watching, someone that always, Dad put work before almost everything. And a lot of the time Dad put work before us. And he says that, and he loved us more than anything. But work was Dad's life, and that made him happy, absolutely. But I look at him and Mum and things that they didn't get to do because Dad was always working, or holidays they didn't get to take, and that kind of thing. And yeah, losing someone that you love in such a brutal, cruel fashion reminds you how quickly this thing called life is over. And, I that's certainly been kind of rammed home to me in recent times as well, and makes me even more determined to be happy and to have peace. I think peace is the biggest thing, not even happiness, because happiness is amazing, and when you have moments of it, it's wonderful, but life isn't like that. And there will be moments when I'm anxious. There'll be moments when I feel like shit. There'll be moments that are really difficult and challenging and hard. But peace to me is being able to handle all those emotions as well as I can and as capably as I can. And for me, the number one thing is peace, because when I have peace, even if there's things going on, I'm a better mother, I'm more present, I'm a better partner, I'm a better daughter, I'm a better colleague at work. And so what I've been working on recently over the last 6 months with a psychologist, first time I've really ever seen one, has just been that, how do I handle emotions better? And it started when I was in hospital losing Dad, and I just reached out to someone and said, basically, help me, I'm fucked, I don't know how to lose my dad. And it turned into the most incredible thing that I now do every week. I did her this morning before you guys. And it is just dealing with so much stuff that I've never dealt with, past traumas, all the stuff I used to think was such a wank, but also how I can, handle every emotion better. And that's what therapy does for me. It's just feeling everything you have to feel, because life's a bitch sometimes, but doing it in the most effective and healthy way. And that's what I'm trying to do at the moment. And it's a hard slog. It's a lot of bloody work, but I'm already seeing the benefits, and they will only continue to come. So I do recommend that to everyone, to see someone, because it's so beneficial.
Well, and that's really special, because we wouldn't have talked about that 15, 20 years ago. So it really has changed. And
it's interesting, even like a boss of mine, yesterday texted me wanting to do a Zoom this morning. And I just wrote back, hey, I've got my psychologist at 11, but I can try and switch. And it didn't even, and this morning I'm kind of looking going, oh shit, is that like weird to say? And it just did not even come into my mind that it would be something that I should even be ashamed of, or that I should hide, or that. And now, I've talked to everyone and anyone about it. I've become one of those punishers that talks about my therapist. And I'm really not into that stuff, and I never have been. But having done it now, I just see it as such an important part of my life, and something that I wish I'd done 10 years ago, but that doesn't matter. I'm doing it now. So, yeah, it's really powerful stuff, and it's helped me immensely in a very short period of time. So that will only improve.
Once again, being real, which is all we can ask for, or all you can ask of yourself, really. So that's pretty special. So just to finish, what's on the horizon? What's the next 5-10 years look like for you? I know you said you want to be a good mother, and you want to continue doing the balance that you're operating at now. But is there any crazy dreams on the horizon that you'd love to go, I'd like to really do that or fulfill that?
Ooh, look, career-wise, radio is we're in our third year now, and that was a really high-risk move, going to a network that had, I think, sacked the 10 previous teams prior. It had just been basically a basket case since Kyle and Jackie O had left. And so We had our highest ratings in 10 years last survey after, 2.5 really tough years. So that's incredible. And we're really powering there. And look, just to continue that trajectory would be incredible. And we've got a lot of confidence that we can do that. So look, I look at radio as a 10-year gig for me. That would be my dream, absolutely. And you look at the other breakfast shows in Sydney and they're 20-year, 15-year, 12-year teams that we're up against. So that for me is amazing because the lifestyle, it's brutal hours, as in, you're getting up very, very early, but it's an incredible gig and great fun and good as a mother as well. The Sky stuff, I love doing my show. I get asked about politics a fair bit. Obviously off the back of lobbying for the legislation, I now cover politics every week on my show. I've got very good relationships with former prime ministers, current prime ministers, a lot of politicians. I've been asked to run numerous times, which is incredibly flattering. At the moment, definitely not, just because it doesn't work for me as a single mum. But down the track, I feel, especially with Dad's passing, there's an element to his legacy that is unfulfilled, in that there are things that he was fighting desperately for that he would have achieved absolutely, because our country needs the things that he wanted to implement, and that's all in the field of national security and defence that he didn't get to complete because cancer took him from us. So there's a part of me at some stage that may be really tempted to enter that domain, but then there's also a part of me that thinks, fuck no. So it's a real
It's the pesky journalists you'll have to deal with. Could you imagine being on a, Friday night TV show on Sky? Heaven forbid.
Oh, what a punish they'd be. Mind you, compared to a lot of them, I am soft. I am very soft. I'm the nice one. I send media advisors, just let David know I'm going to ask him about this so he's not surprised, as opposed to a lot of them who try and do gotcha moments. So, look, I'm kind in that way. But, yeah, look, I'd be slaughtered, but definitely open to it at some stage down the track. But for now, very content, which is nice for me because I've never felt content before in my career, but I do at this stage. So I think the therapy is paying off, and that whole peace thing that I'm trying to build in my life is maybe halfway there.
We can hear the contentment. Here's to heaps more peace for you over the next 10 years. We're going to watch your career from afar, and we're very proud. So well done. Thank you for talking to us on the podcast.
I'm glad it's from afar and not like at my window, because that would be really
stalkers.
creepy. I've had enough of them, gents. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being part of the podcast, Erin.
No, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed that, and I don't enjoy all of them, but that was really good value. So thank you, and really great questions as well. You really challenged me a little bit there, which I enjoy. So thank you so much for having me.